So, welcome. And Paul, if you'd like to introduce yourself now.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you and to see friends, very dear friends on the screen, as well as people I don't know. It's just lovely. Um, and why did I write this article? Well, the article did actually write me, really, in that I began it about 3 years ago when I was on Equipping for Ministry with Ruth and Kate, who are here. Um, and it became a kind of summary of what I thought about the Earth crises being climate breakdown and ecocide, loss of biodiversity, the sixth mass extinction, whatever you want to call it. But the two crises run together in parallel from the same cause of our industrial capitalist consumer model destroying the biosphere. So that's why I wrote it. And I think it, it, the core of it is the sense that as Quakers were in the midst, because of these epochal changes uh, flowing from the earth, that Quakerism, along with almost everything else, is also changing. And for us, that change is summarized in the sense that we are moving from answering God in that of everyone to answering God in that of everything. And that's a profound change. It's only one word, but it's a really profound change if we carry it through. And we must carry it through because answering that of God in every one is no longer sufficient. The earth is saying, enough of you, one species. And and if you in that move you come to pantheism or panentheism, and that's what I really wanted to explore. And it felt to me like, if you look back to the 19th century and Darwin and the discovery of geology, Darwin tore up our sense of the past. Could no longer think of the past as being described by the Bible. And 50 years later, we had 1895, the Manchester Conference, and out of that came British liberal Quakerism, reflecting a sense of the sacred which was no longer defined by the Bible or by other people, and reinforcing George Fox's original sense of a direct relationship with the sacred. And now, 50 years ago, we had Club of Rome and Limits to Growth saying we cannot go on like this. And now, 50 years later, we have the Earth crises tearing up our sense of the future. We no longer have a sense of the future. We don't believe, it seems to me, nearly as much as we did in the future. So all these things come together in a sense of, how do we really rethink our relationship with the earth in a spiritual, and I guess probably actually a theological way, which is very unusual for Quakers, but I think it's really important that we think of it like that, because the change that we're being asked to live is absolutely huge.
Thank you, Paul. Marigold, if you'd like to position yourself for the evening.
Hello, friends, and thank you for that, Paul. That's very thought-provoking, and I suddenly started thinking about that rather than what I was about to say. um, so I wrote the article really because Jill asked me to, and I really hesitated because I've always thought of Friends Quarterly as being a bit, for boffins, really, academics, and lots of, deep thought and research and references and all that. And I'm not really one of them. So that's not in any way to disparage those who are, but I'm not. And so I had to, in order to talk about interfaith work, I had to talk about lived experience, of which I've got some stories to tell, you might say. And I wrote it in a way with the intent of helping people to think that they can do it too, and that the small things really matter, and we're all part of this big picture of peacemaking, and lots of things are possible, and they're also really fascinating, even when they're very, very hard. So it was quite a challenge for me to write at all. Haven't written much, and I'm now no longer working at a senior professional level for Friends, so I have a bit more time, and of course I'm now looking back at things, but I do have a lot of notes, so it's all true and real, but it's with a slight sort of arm's length perspective on it. Although I have to say I'm very active with the churches locally, which I might talk a bit about later. So the intent was to give a picture of being a sort of senior civil servant to Friends, the challenges it required, and some of the things I did in relation to it.
Thank you. So there you've heard it from our authors, and I understand that everyone's been sent copies of their articles, so you hopefully have had a chance to look at some of that. So I'm going to hand over now to Olivia, who's going to field questions for Paul and Marigold, so you have an opportunity to ask whatever it is you'd like to ask.
Yes, absolutely. So you can either put a hand up on Zoom if you'd like to ask a question, or put it in the chat if you prefer to write it, and we'll keep an eye on that. But I think just to start us off, if I could go to you, Paul, and I'm looking at some of the questions we had in the back of the FQ. How is faith or belief a way rather than a notion for you as a Quaker, thinking about these ideas you've mentioned about, seeing that of God in everything, not just everyone? How does that play out in your life?
Well, I think because for me and my sense of where we are and in relation to the Earth crisis is that none of us know the way. It is really almost like being back in 1652 in some ways. We know that we have a way of looking at the world, but suddenly the world is completely different to the way we thought it was, and to the way that certainly the assumptions I lived my life for the first 60 years of it, that progress was good, that growth was good or necessary, or all that is falling away. So I think proceeding with faith and not knowing, and as Joanna Macy would say, walking over the world with an open, broken heart amidst everything that is happening, is very much part of the Quaker tradition and hasn't currently got much to do with belief, really. It's about how we live and really see and face into as much as we possibly can what's happening. Yeah.
And in terms of how we face that, then, what had changed about the way you approach, if anything had changed, how do you approach this kind of more uncertain world ahead of us? And what does it make you do or not do?
Well, I think one of the things that's changed is that as Quakers, we quite inadvertently, the way opened to us having communities of worship online. So when I started with Equipping for Ministry in 2019, just 9 months before lockdown, as a group, we started meeting every morning online. And that ability to worship online every day, and you see it now with Woodbrook and with Living Witness and all sorts of things, is quite extraordinary because it gives you the opportunity of practicing. If we were Buddhists, we would meditate every day. It would be just at least once a day. And now, if we want, we can worship together every day if we wanted to, or certainly several times a week. And that can also happen as in Living Witness on a Friday morning, for instance, around a particular topic. So that is a meeting for worship for the earth on a Friday morning. And those two things are combined of witness and worship. So you have a supporting community whilst you're working out what the witness that you need to live is quite new, and really, what a blessing, what a way opening for us right at this time when we needed it.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm reminded of your story of the I believe it was robins, wasn't it? And sort of, flying to the north or south and needing to do that part of it as well as knowing which way to go, first of all. I can see a few hands up, so if I could ask Trevor, if you unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Okay, excuse me. These two articles, one about the environment and the other about peace building, those two topics, it seems to me, are extremely good topics for us to work with other churches and other faiths on. And so I thought this session might be especially useful to share experiences of working with other faiths and other churches on these issues. I mean, I'd be, to start with, pleased to hear from our speakers on that subject and how they found it, but from others who are with us tonight as well.
Thank you, Trevor. If you wouldn't mind just popping your hand down. And yeah, I'd invite anyone else. You're also very welcome to give your response to Trevor there, but if we can maybe ask Marigold first to respond to that.
Thank you very much. Hello, Trevor. Nice to see you. So I spent a lot of my working life working with churches and faiths on the issue of peace building, peacemaking. I do think it's absolutely essential. I guess I should mention that I've just today, actually, I offered to the local churches here, local churches, because there's not a big interfaith community here in the southwest. I'm speaking to you from Dorchester and Dorset. I offered the local churches together group an informal off-the-record discussion group on Israel-Palestine, and I've run 2 sessions with them so far. And I do think we have, as I said in the article, we've got some really great facilitation methods, many of which I might add I learned from Tom Leimdorfer, who's here on this session this evening, to apply things like consensus building, how to hold difficult conversations, how to make people confident enough in order to talk about very, very difficult subjects. So in answer to your question, Trevor, I think we've got lots of things to offer. And we can sort of inject our own positioning and our own understanding within all of that. So I've been with Anglicans, Methodists, URC, what else were they? Another Quaker. Oh, and the Salvation Army staff too today. It's a wonderful pooling of people with different Christian, obviously, perspectives, but they're all struggling with very divided, conflicted communities, not knowing what to say. We can use great consensus building tools to help draw out, to allay their anxieties and their fears, really. Their fear of saying something wrong. That's what everybody's terrified of at the moment. and their ability to draw things together. So I think we've got lots to offer. We also have a very active eco group among the churches, by the way, Paul. So there's some activity there too. But I won't steal your part of the question there.
I remember I used to be part of the Ipswich Interfaith Community Forum, which was Muslims, Sikhs, liberal Jewish people, Anglicans and Quakers. And at the beginning of lockdown, I remember talking with them just as lockdown had been going for about a couple of months on Zoom, and they were all grieving for their lack of focus. They're all grieving because there wasn't, they couldn't relate to the vicar or the imam or the rabbi, and they didn't have a focus and a liturgy. And I remember thinking that how different Quakerism was, because there's no point to Quakerism. There is no single point. We sit in a circle with no thing in the center. And we were all just taking to Zoom, and Zoom fitted our equality. Like on this screen right now, we're all equal in 31 different little screens with no one elevated. And I think that also speaks to how ecology works. So the natural world doesn't have a leader. There aren't keystone species. It's not one species that runs an ecology or speaks for an ecology or any of that. So I think there's some really interesting parallels between Quaker forms of worship and networked societies, like we are digitally, and ecologies, that we have yet to even scratch the surface of what that means, and how come we're here in this position where it all matches very neatly for us. Doesn't necessarily make it better or easier, but it's very extraordinary that there is so much symmetry at all those three levels. Our worship at the digital and at the ecological, we're all the same format.
Thank you both for those responses. I'm very fascinated by that idea that Zoom was maybe more easy for Quaker to get on board with. That's a very interesting idea. I think Alistair had his hand up for a little while. Can we go to you, Alistair, for your question? And we'll come to you next, Bill.
Yeah, this is a question mainly for Marigold, but Paul may have an input into it. I was particularly interested in your comments about the problems the IAPI had setting up and how the different conflicts were. You also had to work through a whole range of conflict, particularly over the boycott of settlement goods. I'm interested in that because at the moment you mentioned the Board of Deputies of British Jews. The leadership of that has changed in the last 2-3 years, and there's a different style of how they're pronouncing on the Palestine-Israel question. But I've also been very impressed the way that liberal Jews have come out on the demonstrations and made statements and so on, which I'm sure we could fully agree with. So it seems to me in a way that the nature of the discussions will have to be different this time round with official Jews. I know the board doesn't represent the majority, but just how do you think that this building of consensus will have to change because of the nature of Palestine and Israel question at the moment? Different techniques, different approaches.
Well, it's true to say everything is even more polarized than it was. People are digging their heels in terms of their position, refusing to move, refusing to have a conversation at all, and that does require a lot of work. There's an enormous amount of fear from, and of course a lot of it is driven by social media. People are very frightened of being targeted, being identified as having one position or another, and that creates an impasse really, where people are just frightened to engage at all. And in a microcosm that's we've got in this little town, although on the whole there is no Jewish community here in Dorchester. So there's kind of no conversation about that really. But there are a lot of evangelical churches, and there are a lot of more liberal churches. So there are sort of strains and divisions with regard to that. So we do need to, from my point of view, we've got to dig deep on our theological language about equality and about peace and about what love in a community really means. So we do need to use other unifying language, but the institutions there are not operating at a national or international level now. I'm looking at it from the outside, and yes, there has been a hardening of positions, and a hardening that the people who are appointed to those positions are harder. So I'm not saying it was easy then when we had a long ongoing dialogue with the Board of Deputies, which was really, really insightful and very, very important to do. And I know that dialogue can last a lifetime, and it's still important to do it. It's still important to do it. But it's a very, very tough climate that we're in now for everybody trying to say there is another way of using language about what's going on in order for it to change.
Oh, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
I don't. I really loved your article, Marigold, and I learned so much from it. I don't feel I've got anything particular. I don't have any. I think, like many people, I just feel confused and not clear about Gaza, Palestine, and just grateful to have the article. And I don't have any other people will have more to contribute on that, I think, than I will.
Thank you. So Bill, you've had your hand up, and we've got Charlotte and Linda as well. We'll come to you after that. So Bill first. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Bill, if you're saying anything.
I'm off now. One of the things we say that Quakers believe in is that we don't believe in anything, but we then say there's something of God in everybody. And if that's what we hold dear, then it is a belief in some respects. But there's now talk amongst scientists and some theologians about God being the totality of consciousness. And this would include the consciousness of all sentient beings, not just people. We're just part of it. Would this be something that the speakers might comment on?
I think for me, Bill, that's absolutely the core of it, really. And what I used to work in as a GP and have a very kind of sciencey background and head space, and making sense of what the sciences say is, I think, is really important in all this. And the science does seem to be, to me, to be saying that many of the old categories, the distinct, clear-cut distinction between human and non-human, between different species, between all sorts of the dichotomies on which we constructed our world are not as true as we thought they were. And one of those is that we have a commonality with other beings which we have denied. And that's why reading all the stuff in the article about that I wrote about in terms of animal communication really was stunning. We've been looking outwards to space to find other intelligent beings, and actually maybe they're here on Earth, and that the amount of communication, when I read about it, that actually happens, clearly many animals, not all, many animals have a far greater degree of sentience and awareness and emotionality than we've ever described, allowed to ourselves to believe before. And again, that's just fantastic. That's a real gift at this time when we're trying to decenter ourselves and really see that the natural world has its own way of being and its own essence that we need to respond to. Lo and behold, we find that the degrees of communication amongst elephants or amongst prairie dogs or amongst dolphins is absolutely an order of magnitude more than we thought it was. And that links us back to an animism that is both modern and ancient, that the world is alive and is sentient and is spiritual, that in these complex biological systems, God and love, that is how God and love, to me, manifests itself.
Thank you, Paul. I wonder if Marigold, you might have anything to say relating to that point about God as a totality of consciousness, kind of being part of everyone and everything.
Well, thank you, Olivia. Thanks for the question. The interfaith perspective, if you like, interfaith and interchurch work is very tribal, and so you're working with tribes that have identified themselves by their religion, and so and we have aspects of that among ourselves too. The Quaker tribe, this is the way we do things, we don't do it like you do, you don't wear the things you do. Being able to have a conversation across many faiths about a God being beyond people, beyond liturgy, beyond structures, beyond practice is really, really rich, but you very rarely get there because there's so many other things that you've got to get to. Now, the justice, peace and integrity of creation work that the World Council of Churches did in the 70s and 80s did a lot of that conversing, and that fed into the United Nations Environment Development Conference in 1992. So the churches were Quakers were very instrumental in that, in ensuring that non-governmental organizations had an influence in that global conference, which affected lots and lots of things. From that, we had Agenda 21, we had a very powerful influence on geography teaching right across the world, big understanding about the importance of retaining the planet and all the things in it. And there was lots of strands of, this is a spiritual conversation, this is not just a practical one. So I do think that's kind of continuing, but it's not a conversation I've had very often, really. There's so many other things that get in the way, really.
Something that I think might be related to it was in The Friend this week, the article on that was reviewed by Daniel Clark Flynn, Consciousness Beyond Life, a book that's been published. And that seems to me be something that's moving towards a different understanding of what God is or could be.
Thank you, Bill. I think I'll move to Charlotte now that you get a chance to share your question as well.
Thank you, Olivia. This is a question for each of you, Marigold and Paul. What would you love to hear yourself saying 1 year from now?
Paul does seem very deep in thought, so I wonder if we might go to Marigold first.
I can't answer it. It would be there's too many levels. I mean, I could sort of, you know, give a very domestic local one, but I don't think that's what you're really asking for. And yeah, I can't. Maybe
Marigold, can I just ask, what was the first thing that came into your mind?
everything's fine in a year.
We can only hope. Paul,
What came into my mind, Charlotte, was, oh my God, I've got to answer this question in 10 seconds, and what am I going to say? And I just want to thank Charlotte did the mandala on the front cover of Friends Quarterly. She does the most beautiful mandalas, and this is one of hers. So thank you for that, Charlotte. I think what I most like to hear myself say, I think something like, there's more we in the world and less I. I think we're in for the last 600 years, capitalism and consumerism has moved us from we to I. We used to be much more we, collectively, mutuality, solidarity, and we've got more and more I and me and autonomous self and me, my journey, and me, my bucket list, and me, my whatever. And I think that the earth is saying enough of I, and we have to be we, and that we is both human and non-human. It's not a great answer to a good question, but it's something like that, if we'd moved further along that spectrum.
thank you both. That was a challenging question for us all, I think, there. So thank you, Charlotte. We've got Linda and Beth, your hand up as well. So we'll go to Linda first, please, and then we'll come to you, Beth.
Thank you, and thank you both for some really thought-provoking and inspiring articles. Trevor was asking about experience of working with other churches, and in the last year or two, I've worked with a number of churches that have put up exhibitions from the Loving Earth Project about the environment, and heard sermons and discussions, and each time it feels like their heart's in the same place as mine is, but they're tying themselves in knots to be consistent with the teachings of the Bible, etc. So I was very excited and heartened by Paul's rewriting of the Adam and Eve story in his earlier article, and in George Fox's there in this one, which seems to say what the Spirit wants to be telling us. We do experiential theology, if you like, as Quakers. So I suppose my questions are, is your experience, especially Marigold, similar to that in other faiths? Are they tying themselves in knots to try and do the right thing, but you've got, and the Buddhists have got a slightly different, a rather different angle on this, of course, and Hindus, but also how can we encourage friends to speak positively, to use language that speaks to our experience, rather than say, oh, we don't do this and we don't do that, and God this, buts all the times. We need, because one of the real problems in sharing our experience is that we're, I think, too shy in doing that, too shy in sharing what we're understanding the Spirit's telling us, because of language, because we don't want to force people into anything. No one's going to force anybody.
All right, I don't know if we might have missed a tiny bit at the end there, Linda, but Paul or Marigold, would either of you like to come in on that first?
Well, Paul, is it all right if I start with that? Yes, a lot of churches particularly are very can be constrained by their liturgy, by the requirements of their religious calendar. But they would very often say to us that their rituals and their requirements liberate their spirituality. And I think we sometimes miss the fact that we think we're open to the Spirit because we have so few of those outward things. But they say it enables them to enter into spiritual life through those vehicles. So it's, and sometimes it's good to enter into that life with them, to experience it and to hear what they say, how they experience ours. Because sometimes, you know, people who come to Friends find us empty. They need a bit more structure or need a bit more guidance, and they may need some teaching. So for us, a Quaker, I think for all of us here, probably Quaker meeting is very full and very rich, and we love the experience. But for other people, they're looking for something. It's like that terrible Quaker joke, isn't it? Somebody new to meeting asks somebody next to them, when does the service start? And the friend replies, the service begins at the rise of meeting. It's that we understand what we're doing, but it's often opaque to others. But we can similarly experience something deep and spiritual from other ways of engaging with the divine, or whatever word you want to use. But leaders of churches and people who represent things are way more constrained than we are. And they're very, very conscious of their role of leadership, and often really frightened to step beyond anything. In fact, I've just been listening to some of that this afternoon from some of our vicars. They're really frightened. So they use the liturgy as their vehicle because they feel it's legitimate. It is legitimate, of course, but it doesn't really go to the heart of some of the problems that their congregations are facing.
That's really interesting, Marigold. I hadn't thought of that, a lot of that. I think sometimes we get called to do things positively, like you have, Linda, in the Loving Earth project, about just being, that's what I need to do the Loving Earth project, and to set it up, and that's great. But one of the books that has really helped me most in the last few years is Rachel Muir's book, Testimony, about Quaker testimonies. And in that she says that the testimonies for Quakers always grew out of a "this I will not do" moment, not a "this I will do," but "this I will not do." So that was, I will not doff my cap because we are all equal. I will not swear an oath because all truth should be spoken in the same breath and in the same way. And I think that it's much easier and less entangling to come to that moment of when you think, this I will not do. So a few years ago, thinking, I just don't want to eat any more meat. I will not do that anymore. And it's much easier to start from that place of this I will not do. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You're standing on the rock of what it is. I will not fly because I want to make the air holy again. And from there, you don't have to watch. One of the things that Rachel Muir says is that in those refusals, the refusal to fight, you don't have to have an answer. It's about the refusal, and the refusal creates space in which other people can think, oh, there's a different way, and that we can find the way. But the starting point is the "this I will not do" moment. And that somehow, well, yeah, that doesn't involve much entanglement in belief. You might have to justify it, but it basically comes from some deep sense of being grounded in the spirit in oneself after a due process of discernment. You know, it's not just I will not do this. There's a reflective process embedded in that, but it feels a very good and healthy place to start from, rather than from beliefs and creeds.
Thank you, Marigold and Paul, for those answers. We will move swiftly on to Beth, as I know we're getting rather close to the end of time now. So Beth, your question, please.
I want to say two things. First of all, Marigold, thank you for that fantastic article, you know, based on such experience. And your experience also of bringing people together and people working towards consensus using our Quaker tools. But that goes directly to what I want to ask Paul about. Because, Paul, your article was very thought-provoking, and what you've been saying tonight is very thought-provoking. And when I think of the possibility of the Earth working together towards, you know, all sentient beings on Earth working together to heal it and everything, then I look at my cat, goes outside, kills a mouse. The cat isn't thinking about the Earth. The cat just wants to kill. And the lion eating the zebra, it's not thinking about the Earth. It wants to survive. So I don't see much evidence in the rest of nature, the rest of sentient beings, of a wish to heal the Earth. Well, maybe I'm just limited, and maybe the elephants and dolphins have got this awareness and we just haven't yet managed to talk to them. But nature read in tooth and claw is very much there with us. And I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thanks. I think they're both true. The cat wants to kill the mouse, and that's part of what happens. And at a wider level, the ecology and the net and web of being and life demonstrates a complexity out of which it's possible to feel love arising, which is where I think in a sort of biologically enabled pantheism, that is what happens. And they're both true. And nature read in tooth and claw is part of the answer. It's part of one way of seeing it. But it's also a way that has been highly selectively chosen by capitalism to highlight, because capitalism depends on competition, it depends on exploiting things. So we see the cat eating the mouse and think that's how reality is. What we don't see is the microbiome in the cat, feeding the cat and enabling the cat and being able to be the cat, and that and us and in ourselves too. And we don't see the betrothed in heart and paw collaboration and symbiosis, which is actually much more common, I think, as my reading and understanding, within the natural world than cooperation is, than competition is. Capitalism has emphasized the competitive nature of nature for its own needs. It doesn't mean it's not true, but we've taken one slice of looking at the world and said, that's reality. Everything has to compete all the time, and it's all about self-interest. Whereas in fact, what the biological web of life teaches is that, yes, that does happen, but the symbiosis and the cooperation actually is much greater than that. So somewhere in this is the answer to your paradox, which is very real. You know, where does evil come from? But I think it's not surprising we haven't got our heads around this yet. We're just at the beginning of this epochal shift into thinking we're not the most important thing on the planet. And we've spent 600 years thinking we are, and it justifies us exploiting everything.
Thank you, Paul. I can see, I think, 3 other hands, John, Trevor and Yuri. I think Trevor, as you've spoken before, I might call on John and Yuri first, just so they get a chance to speak. I hope that's all right. So John, if you could ask your question, please.
Before I ask a question, could I just make one comment on interfaith relations, in that I'm a member of SACRA in Bradford, which is the Standing Advisory Committee on Religious Education, which includes people of all faiths, and a number of Christians, of which the Quakers are one. And I think the fact that they've had, they have a very clear focus, and that's to ensure that the law, as far as they can, is applied as far as collective worship is concerned, and as far as the religious education syllabus is concerned, has given them a focus such that they've worked, in my opinion, in the years that I've been a member, very well together. And of this year, they've discussed also the fact that Bradford is going to be a City of Culture 2025. So I'm just saying that's one way in which I've seen people of all religious persuasions working together. My question really was on the question of growth and capitalism, etc. Because as a young person, I was always optimistic and believing in progress, which, if I think I look back, probably meant continuing growth, as though the Earth's resources were not finite. Now, as an older person, I've had to change my mind, but I just wondered what Paul thought of whether, although I agree with what he said, whether he feels that we can change our activity such that things can be put in order, or is it inevitable that things just go downhill and we just take what comes? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are really common, deep questions, John, that we all are facing. And I think I can only answer that from my own experience, which was when I retired, I didn't get clinically depressed, but I got depressed about the state of the world and what was happening with the climate, and I, out of that, went on the Equipping for Ministry course, and whilst that didn't address much about the earth, it did give me a whole set of ways of thinking and a Quaker framework and a Quaker history to look at what is happening, and that really helped me. And I think there's a journey to go through. Well, I went through a journey anyway of really looking and being depressed and feeling fearful and recognizing that, well, certainly our lifestyle is ending and needs to end, and we have passed, I think, peak oil, but also peak hospitality probably, and peak gadgets and peak entertainment in many ways. There's all sorts of peaks that we are passing, and there's a lot of evidence around for that. And that we have to deconstruct the aeroplane whilst it's still in mid-flight, and that is quite likely to end in disaster, and build the new whatever, not an aeroplane, but whatever is going to take us forward in economic terms whilst we're deconstructing this one. And I think that out of that constant looking, with help and support and a worshipping community and a framework, that's all we can do. We really just, that's the best we can do, to witness what is going on and to do our best and to recognize that the kind of things that Marigold has spent her life doing, of conflict resolution, peace work, that hard work is going to erupt within our communities as the fruits of progress and the fruits of economic growth wither, but not because of it, the politicians aren't getting it right. It's going to wither because the earth is going to foreclose the future which we thought was our right. And that's going to be very difficult. So those skills, which Quakers have and many other people have, are part of facing a very, very uncertain future. And I just think it's the sole work of our times doing this. And there is no right answer and there's no right place to be on it, but it is completely rooted in where we need to be, I think.
Thank you, Paul. There's also a few comments.
Olivia, can I just say a couple of quick things?
Yes, of course.
I think it's really, really important for us as friends to acknowledge that there has always been greed and selfishness and violence and terrible things happening in the world. And it's definitely our job to do something about them, about all of that. But it's also important to recognize the enormous blessings that all of us here have, and to every day is a gift and every day is an opportunity to make the world a better place. And we have fantastic resources with which to do that. So it's really important not to lose hope.
Thank you for that, Marigold. I think that's something that can be very easy to lose hold of sometimes with everything going on. Yuri, just bearing in mind we have about 5 minutes left, if you could ask your question, and we'll try and get to Trevor at the end as well.
Thank you. Thank you for this webinar and for the opportunity to read two wonderful articles disseminated before the webinar. Pursuit of spiritual universality, universal and perpetual peace brought me to Quakerism. All my life I resisted to spiritual and secular justification of violence in our culture here in Ukraine. I feel every soul and everything have a value of dignity, and all religions need to believe in this inherent value and inability and duty of every soul to create better life around. I felt religions need soul rights, like societies need human rights to achieve peace. And articles of Marigold and Paul helped me to understand better Quaker work to achieve the spiritual peace and justice in practice. But I would like to ask about this issue of conversion and mission Marigold is mentioning in the end of article, because I heard from some people that Quakers are not missionaries, and this converting or this helping people to find this inner light of faith, it is not about Quakers, and that's why there is less and less Quakers in Europe and so on. I had such sad reflections. So I wonder whether it is true, and how to deal with it.
Thank you, Yuri, and I'm really pleased that you're part of this conversation. So Yuri is part of the Friends World Committee for Consultation European Middle East section, Peace and Service conversations online. So we're very much connected with European friends through other ways, and obviously you can all be part of that if you'd like to. But a couple of answers for you, Yuri. Firstly, is that Friends Quakers have been through periods of mission work historically, and there's quite a lot of pretty knowledgeable people on this event this evening who could tell you a lot more than I could about that. But it's important to acknowledge that Friends have gone through great missionary zeal periods. At the moment, British Quakers are extremely anxious about disappearing, and that does mean there's a lot of anxiety about public presentations and being seen in the public domain. It also means that I think there's a mixed view, if you like, about whether we should be very public or whether we should just hope that people find us, as indeed you have through the peace movement. And in fact, a lot of people come to Friends through our peace work, through seeing what is done collectively and individually. So it's a kind of mixed picture at the moment. And I would say it's really important that people speak from experience and not simply opinion, but that we engage, that we try and do things, and then people know us through what we do. Not only it's kind of, you've dipped in this evening into this kind of much deeper thinking end of things, which I think will suit you, actually, Yuri. You're a very deep thinker yourself. So there's a mixed picture. I certainly hope, and I've certainly heard, and I think you have too, the number of Russian deserters or conscientious objectors who say, well, I've been looking for Quakers, but I didn't know. I knew there was something there. I knew there were people somewhere who would say that fighting's wrong. And it's really, really humbling to hear some of their accounts, as you know. And indeed, of course, many of the people that you know in Ukraine as well, who are refusing to fight. Extremely brave people, extremely brave.
Thank you, Yuri, for that question, and Marigold for that response. I am conscious we are hitting 8 o'clock now. Just trying to find Jill on the screen here. I don't know if we're able to go on any longer with the confines of the the time we have.
We could have a couple more minutes.
Yeah, if friends are happy with that, we'll go back to Trevor. If we could try and keep things as quick as possible so we can all go off and have dinner if needed, that'd be really appreciated.
We'll try and do that. I wanted to share something which I think connects with what we've been talking about, and which friends may find useful. So I'll just tell you what we've been doing in Harpenden. As a member of our local Churches Together group, I represent our group, as clerk of the meeting, and I suggested last year we hold an event on the International Day of Peace, which is the 21st of September. And they agreed, and we held an outdoor event, and with members from each church were invited to just come and contribute a prayer or a reading or something like that. And several local churches were happy to join in on that. I suggested, because we have a local Muslim group worshipping in our meeting house, I said, shall we invite them to join us? And they agreed, and the group agreed. The Muslim group were very happy to be part of that, and they contributed prayers and readings as well. And that was quite a successful event. And it has led to us developing better relations, or interesting relations, with this local group, to the extent that they have invited us to their end of Ramadan, or well, their breaking fast meal this week, so that will be good. And we are hoping to explore with them whether we can do something more along the lines of something on the Day of Peace, or having some sort of dialogue, particularly about Israel-Palestine. Sadly, in Harpenden, we don't have a Jewish group that worships nearby, and that might have been interesting. But I'm hopeful, and I thought friends might be interested in that, and I'd be very interested in if anybody's got any suggestions for how to take it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I think that really helped highlight a lot of the key points today, really, about how we build relationships and connections with other people, whether that's different faith groups or other species, all the different creatures on the planet. I think if we could just go back to Paul and Marigold just very briefly for any closing remarks from you two. If we could maybe go to Paul first.
I just would like to remind friends, or say to friends, because it's increasingly important to me, that this is the equinox. Today is the equinox. And the equinox is one of the 2 days each year when light and dark falls equally on all things and all creatures. And we should celebrate it as a celestial, heavenly event that has existed for all time and will exist for all time, no matter whether we're here or not. And the light and the dark are falling on all of us equally today. And that's just really remarkable and worth knowing and celebrating. And thank you for being here this evening. It's been really lovely and very, very interesting.
It has indeed been a very special evening, and extremely stimulating, but encouraging too. I do think it's really important that we are a happy people, because it makes people want to be with us and walk the walk with us. And there are so many things going on in the world which are so hard to deal with. We need one another to be able to walk the walk. So we are some of the most privileged people on the planet also, which we mustn't forget, that we've got to use our privilege to its very, very best effect. So we have responsibilities, but also we have so many gifts and so many opportunities, and it is so lovely to be walking this walk until we can no longer do it. So keep it up, friends. I'm walking with you and you're walking with me.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Marigold. Thank you, everyone, for being here and sharing from your light and your darkness. Feels like a very beautiful mix of reflections, questions, sharings, offerings, and hope. Go well, dear friends. Thank you.